For years, I lived in a world where my silence was my safety and my questions were my secrets. But as 2026 began, I realized that true healing can't happen in isolation. Today, for the first time ever, my sister Jill and I are sitting down together behind the microphone to break the silence that has divided our family for so long. We've walked different paths. Jill through the fire of legal battles, and me through the quiet deconstruction. Everything I was taught to believe. But now, those paths have finally crossed. Over the next 70 minutes, we are going deeper than we ever have before. From the truth about the IBLP's grip on our childhood to the heartbreaking reality of where we stand with our father, Jim Bob, today. This isn't about bitterness. It's about the freedom that comes when you stop counting the cost and start telling the truth. I'm Jinger, and this is our story, unfiltered and finally free. You know, for a long time, Jill and I were on different islands. She was in Arkansas dealing with the legal weight of our family's past, and I was in California trying to rewrite my future. We didn't always see eye on how to handle the fallout. There were years where our conversations were careful, almost guarded, because we were both still so tender from the wounds of our childhood. But something shifted at the end of last year. I realized that as long as we spoke separately, the narrative was still being controlled by those who wanted us to stay quiet. I called Jill, and we talked for hours about the podcast idea. We decided that Tuntcast 2026 would be the year we stood together. It wasn't an easy decision. We knew it would mean more difficult conversations with our parents and potentially more distance from some of our siblings. But the truth has a way of demanding to be told. Standing in that studio with her, looking across the table at my sister, who has fought so hard for her peace, I knew we were doing the right thing. We aren't the rebel daughters. We are the daughters who finally found the courage to speak the words we were once told to hide. When I look back at the big house, I don't just see a home, I see a system. We lived under the umbrella of the IBLP, where every action was dictated by basic life principles that felt anything but basic. As children, we were taught that our parents were our umbrella of protection, and that moving outside of their authority meant stepping into the path of destruction. I remember the fear that lived in the back of my mind. Fear of the world, fear of making a mistake, and even fear of God. It was a world of strict modesty, limited information, and absolute obedience. Jill and I often talk about how we were trained to be performers for the cameras while suppressing our true feelings. We were the faces of a movement we didn't fully understand. In this segment, I want to pull back the curtain on what those early years were really like. The pressure to be, and the moment I realized that the umbrella I was under was actually keeping me from the sun. Watching Jill go through her legal battle with our father was one of the hardest things I've ever witnessed. While I was deconstructing my faith through study and reflection, Jill was on the front lines, fighting for the basic right to be compensated for the years she spent on television. It wasn't about the money for her. It was about the principle of honesty and the recognition of her own worth. I'll admit, at first I didn't fully understand why she was taking such a public stand. I was still in a place where I wanted to keep the peace at all costs. But as I watched her strength, I realized that Jill was doing the heavy lifting for all of us. She was the first one to say no to a system that had always said yes for her. Her book, Counting the Cost, was a turning point, not just for her, but for me too. It gave me the courage to realize that standing up for yourself isn't an act of rebellion. It's an act of survival. When I released Becoming Free Indeed, I knew things would never be the same. Writing that book was my way of disentangling the beauty of Christ from the burden of IBLP legalism. I wanted to tell the world that you can love God without living in fear of man-made rules. But the reaction within the family was mixed. Some of my siblings reached out with support, quietly telling me they were proud of me. Others were silent, and that silence spoke volumes. It was the first time I felt a real shift in the family dynamic. The realization that by speaking my truth, I was stepping outside of the group I think we had been raised with. It was lonely at times, but it also opened the door for a deeper, more honest connection with Jill. We realized we were no longer just sisters by blood. We were sisters in the journey toward freedom. Walking into the podcast studio in early 2026 to really 2026 to record with Jill felt like a dream I never thought would come true. There was a weight in the air, but it wasn't a heavy weight. It was the weight of significance. For the first time, there were no producers telling us what to say, no scripts to follow, and no Duggar brand to protect. I looked over at Jill, and I could see the nerves in her hands, but the determination in her eyes. We spent the first few minutes just sitting in the silence, acknowledging how far we had both come. When the on-air light turned on, it felt like a dam breaking. We started talking about things we had only ever whispered about in private. In this segment, I want to describe that atmosphere. The smell of the coffee, the hum of the equipment, and the incredible, breathtaking feeling of finally being the one to hold the microphone. Speaking, the truth isn't just about finding the right words. It's about overcoming the paralyzing fear that comes after you say them. When Jill and I sat down in front of those microphones, I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. We knew our words would hurt people we love, especially our parents. In the IBLP world, we were taught that sharing any negative aspect of the family was an act of rebellion and a lack of loyalty. But I had to remind myself that silence is often a form of consent to things that aren't right. I had to push past the fear of social media comments and the judgment of our community to share our lived experiences. In this segment, I want to talk about how we navigated that anxiety. We realized that the truth is a light that clears away the shadows of what if. Once the words are out there, they belong to the world, and the peace that follows is worth every ounce of that initial fear. The biggest battle of my life was separating the character of God from the rules of the IBLP. As a child, I was taught that my standing with God depended on how I dressed, what I listened to, and how perfectly I obeyed. Talking to Jill, I realized we were both trapped in that same cage of legalism. Today, I feel so much freedom in my walk with Christ. I told Jill during the podcast that our conversation isn't just about family drama. It's about the rebirth of our faith. We now understand that God loves us because of his grace, not because of our performance. Stepping away from the man made regulations to find the actual truth of the Bible was the most transformative thing we've ever done. When Jill first exposed the truth about our family finances in her book, it sent shockwaves through the fandom. Behind the all is well mask of our TV show was a reality of financial withholding that Jilly was the first to call out. We spent years filming, but we were never given our fair share of the earnings. On the podcast, Jill went into even more detail about how money was used as a tool for control. It wasn't just a business dispute. It was a way to keep us dependent and prevent us from making our own life choices. We were often made to feel guilty for even asking about it. Jill's bravery in standing up for her rights taught me that seeking justice and honesty in business, and honesty isn't unchristian. It's actually a requirement for healthy relationships. Jeremy has been such a blessing amassing in my life. When I was confused and struggling with the legalistic ideas I grew up with, He sat with me and patiently helped me look at what the Bible actually said. He never forced me to change. He just held the door open for me to walk through when I was ready. When I decided to do this podcast with Jill, Jeremy encouraged me to speak my truth for the sake of my own freedom. He isn't just my husband, he is my biggest advocate. Seeing him and Derek support us in the studio gave Jill and me so much extra courage. Having a partner who values your voice and respects your history makes the process of healing so much more manageable. It's been so encouraging to watch Jill and Derek build their own life away from the family compound. They've faced so much criticism and public scrutiny, yet they've remained so unified. Derek was the first one to publicly challenge the family narrative. And while it caused a lot of friction, it ultimately paved the way for the honesty we see today. During the podcast, Jill talked about how they've found peace in their own home, raising their boys with values they truly believe in, watching them thrive. Despite the fallout with my parents has been a light for me. It proves that you can survive the shunning or the distance and come out stronger on the other side. They've shown me that a family built on transparency and mutual respect is worth more than any TV image. One of the most frequent questions we get is, do you still talk to your dad on the podcast, Jill? And I were very honest about how complicated that answer is. For Jill, the relationship is much more strained because of the legal boundaries she had to set. For me, while I still love my father, there is a profound distance that wasn't there before. Our conversations are often surface level now. It's hard to have a deep relationship when the foundation of trust has been shaken. Jim Bob still sees our decision to speak out as a betrayal of the family, whereas we see it as an act of honesty. It hurts to realize that your worth in your father's eyes is tied to your compliance with his rules. We discussed the grief of losing the idea of the father we thought we had and how we are learning to love him from a distance while protecting our own peace. Then there's my mother. Watching Michelle navigate, this is perhaps even more painful for us. We know she loves us, but she is also deeply committed to the system my father has built. Her silence often feels like a choice, and that's a heavy weight to carry as a daughter. During our recording, Jill and I talked about a soft side of the legalism. How the mother's role is to keep the peace, even if it means ignoring the truth. We miss the closeness we once had, but we realize that for her to truly reach out to us, she would acknowledge the flaws in the system she's spent her life defending. It's a quiet kind of heartbreak. We still pray for her every day, hoping that one day she will feel free enough to step outside of that silence and just be our mom again. There was a time when I felt like Jill and I were drifting apart. We were both in survival mode, just trying to keep our own heads above water. But this podcast has been a reclaiming of our sisterhood. Sitting across from her, hearing her voice, and seeing her nod in understanding as I describe my own trauma, it's been incredibly healing. We realized that for a long time, we let the family drama dictate our relationship. Now, we are building something new, a bond that isn't based on being Duggar sisters, but on being two women who respect each other's journeys. We've replaced the guarded conversations with late night texts and honest prayers. Jill has become my greatest confidante in this process of deconstruction, and I am so proud to call her my sister and my friend. People grew up watching us on TV, thinking they knew our lives. But the TV version was a highly edited, carefully curated image. On the podcast, we talked about the bright lights versus the dark corners. The cameras showed the smiles and the matching outfits, but they didn't show the anxiety, the lack of privacy, or the pressure to never say anything wrong. We discussed how we were trained to give camera ready answers. If we were upset or struggling, we had to hide it to protect the ministry and the brand. It was an exhausting way to live. Now, we are finally showing the world the unedited version of ourselves. It's messier, and it's not always wholesome in the way people expect, but it's real. And for the first time in our lives, it's actually ours. The most important reason Jill and I are doing this is for our children. We want to ensure that the cycle of fear and control ends with us. My girls and Jill's boys are being raised in a world where their voices matter, where they are allowed to ask questions, and where they are loved unconditionally. No strings attached. We talked about the boundaries we've set to protect them. They won't grow up as performers for a public audience. They will grow up knowing that their home is a safe place to be themselves. Jill and I both agree, if our parents choose to stay distant because we won't follow the old rules, that is a price we are willing to pay to give our children the freedom we never had. We are building a legacy of grace, and that is the most rewarding work of all. When you speak your truth in a family that values harmony over honesty, there is going to be backlash. Jill and I discussed the silent treatment and the cold shoulder we sometimes receive from siblings who are still very much committed to our parents' worldview. It's hard not to take it personally when people you grew up with suddenly treat you like a stranger or a cautionary tale. We've had to learn to set firm boundaries. We don't engage in circular arguments about theology or family loyalty anymore. We've realized that we can't control how others perceive us, but we can control our own responses. During the podcast, we talked about the importance of finding a new community, friends and mentors who love us for who we are now, not who we were on TV. The backlash is the price of our freedom, and while it's a high price, it's one we are finally willing to pay. The family landscape changed so much in late 2024 and throughout 2025, especially with Jana's marriage and her move to Nebraska. For years, Jana was the glue that held the big house together. Seeing her finally step out, marry Stephen, and start her own life away from the compound was something Jill and I cheered for from the sidelines. It's been interesting to watch the oldest daughter find her own independence at 34 and 35. Even though she hasn't taken the same public stand that Jill and I have, her move to Nebraska is its own kind of statement. It's about creating a space that is truly yours. We talked about how Jana's new chapter and the birth of her son, Archie, represents a shift in the family, a realization that even the most loyal siblings eventually need to find their own path. We love her, and we are so happy she finally has a home that isn't a film set. Healing isn't a destination, it's a daily practice. Jill and I were very open on the podcast about the role of professional therapy in our lives. In our childhood, therapy was often discouraged or replaced with biblical counseling that often just reinforced the shame. Stepping into a therapist's office was one of the scariest and best things I ever did. We discussed how we processed the religious trauma of being told we were never good enough. For us, healing didn't mean walking away from God. It meant walking toward the real God of the Bible, who offers rest, not heavy burdens. We talked about the specific tools we use to manage anxiety and the way we've learned to forgive ourselves for the years we spent living in fear. It's okay to be a work in progress, and it's okay to need help. To anyone listening who feels trapped in a system of control, whether it's the IBLP or any other legalistic environment, we want you to know you are not alone. We know the fear of what will happen if I leave. We know the guilt of feeling like you are betraying your family. But we are here to tell you that there is life on the other side of that fear. You don't have to have all the answers right now. You just have to be willing to ask the first question. Freedom doesn't mean you have to lose your faith. It means you get to find a faith that is actually yours. Jill and I shared how we took small steps, reading different books, talking to people outside our circle, and slowly trusting our own voices again. Your life is not a performance for anyone else. You are allowed to be free. A's, we wrapped up our final recording session in early 2026. I looked at Jill and felt such an incredible sense of peace. We've said what needed to be said. Our hope for the future isn't that the Duggar family stays famous or that we have the most followers. Our hope is that our family legacy becomes one of grace, not control. We dream of a day when all our siblings can sit around a table and speak their truth without fear of being shunned. We want our children to grow up as cousins who are bonded by love, not by a shared brand or a TV contract. The unfolding of our story has been painful at times, but it has led us to a place of authenticity that is worth more than any image of perfection. Thank you for listening, for supporting our journey, and for believing in the power of the truth. We are finally home, and we are finally free,